Some really interesting conversations we've been having all this year about sort of, discrimination and how unfair this world is, whether it's about Black Lives Matter, whether it's about workplace discrimination, whether it's about trans rights, women's rights, gender pay gaps, ethnic pay gaps, all of the above. But some really interesting news stories around in the last couple of days. One, yesterday, the ethnic pay gap looks like it's very much changing as young workers from black and Asian backgrounds now earn more than their white British counterparts, according to official Office of National Statistics figures. This isn't a survey or a poll, official figures. But also the news story today that workplace discrimination claims over sexual orientation more than doubled in the last 5 years. And other discrimination cases have also gone up as well. Well, let's talk about this with Brendan O'Neill. He's editor of Spiked Online. Good morning to you.
Hi, Julia.
We're told, despite, COVID and lockdowns and all the other problems we've got, living in a country which is all terribly unfair, and we're all very horrible to each other, we're all racist, all men are sexist pigs, women who don't accept that have got internalised misogyny. Everybody apparently hates trans people, hates gay people. I have to say, it's not the world that I personally live in, but I don't live in everyone else's life. But these new stats, particularly if we took, first of all, about young ethnic minority workers earning more than their white British counterparts, that completely belies the claims that we've had about horrible racial discrimination and institutional racism in this country. And that just lays that on the ground, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And evidence is continually crashing up against this idea that Britain is a uniquely racist, horrible, sexist, transphobic country. I mean, I think most people probably live in the same kind of world that you live in. We just don't see this. And the evidence doesn't stack it up either. And the fact that we now have, among young workers, black and Asian people being paid well, doing well, and if you look at college entries and so on, and university entries, the white working class boys are doing the worst of all, and black and Asian kids are doing better and better. So the evidence suggests we live in a country that gives everyone a fair strike, gives everyone a fair opportunity. And the more we realize that, the more we can counteract this depressing misanthropic idea that everyone's a victim of hatred.
Well, indeed. And again, it's as you say, crashing into the facts. And that doesn't mean there won't be individual instances where people are victims and where people are racist or sexist or transphobic or that. But that doesn't necessarily mean the whole country is. Well, let's look at this new Ministry of Justice data as well. So they looked at all the different workplace discrimination claims. These are the ones that actually, go all the way to actually someone making a formal complaint. They looked at over 120,000 discrimination cases that went all the way to employment tribunals. Bearing in mind, most cases are settled long before that. And they included a whole variety of different cases. But bearing in mind, unless you have got a specific issue like sexual orientation, disability, race, age, gender, or pregnancy-related complaint, you're very unlikely to get the sort of, if you did win, the sort of financial compensation that would make it worth your while going to tribunal. But sexual orientation claims, these have increased 165% since 2015, almost 500 cases last year. Disability discrimination up 133%, religious or other belief discrimination up 131%, race up 95%, pregnancy up 87%, sex on its own without the pregnancy issue up 15%, age discrimination down 81%. But it's interesting. When we talk about sexual orientation, though, what are we talking about? What sort of cases are we talking about in this circumstance?
Well, that's a really good question. And, I don't want to cast aspersions on anyone who raises a complaint about their workplace, because it's really important that people have the right to go to tribunals if they think they're being treated badly by their bosses. But it does strike me that some of this stuff, particularly when there's been such a huge rise over the past 5 years, firstly, it's because it's now far cheaper to take a case to a tribunal. It used to cost quite a lot of money and the fees have been reduced. So I'm sure more people are taking advantage of that. And secondly, I do think it does also tap into the victim culture and this notion that if you're overlooked for employment, for a promotion, for example, it must be because of your sexual orientation, rather than possibly being that you weren't up to the job. So it's a weird mix of things. And in relation to the sexual orientation cases, some of them that I've read about in this rise are about gender fluid employees feeling that they've been looked over. One trans person, the report said that he was denied a promotion because he became pregnant. And all this kind of language and all these kinds of cases make me wonder what's really going on here. And is this the introduction of the victim culture into the workplace rather than genuine complaints?
But we know for a lot of employers, and I've spoken to people at both ends, and I've had friends who have been outrageously treated, for instance, when they're pregnant. I know people who have say they suffered a racism in their workplace. I've got no reason to not believe them, or discrimination because they are gay. And yet, looking at it from an employer's point of view, as every employer I know, big and small, it feels like they are walking on eggshells constantly, and this idea that there are now effectively protected groups. So if someone behaves really terribly in a workplace, or is really difficult, or not up to their job at all, if they are of a minority ethnic group, if they are a woman, or if they're pregnant, if they're gay, or if they're trans, a lot of employers feel that those people are effectively untouchable, that there is nothing they can do because they have to walk around on eggshells. Now that creates a difficult situation, doesn't it, for employers and for other colleagues if they feel that it's one rule for them and one rule for everyone else.
Exactly right. It's completely divisive. I think it's also bad for people from ethnic minority backgrounds or people of certain sexual orientations, because there will be this sense that perhaps some of those people get the promotion or get treated more nicely because of their heritage, because of their background, because of their sexual preferences, because, as you say, corporations and businesses are now treading on eggshells. And once again, it just doesn't stack up, a lot of this stuff, because we know that corporations, especially big ones, are painfully woke at the moment. They are painfully pro-trans. They wave the pride flag all the time. They go on about this stuff non-stop. The idea that they would be treating people from those backgrounds callously just doesn't hold water. I think the real problem is we've created a culture in which people play the victim card. And they play the victim card in order to win, get a bit of social capital, maybe get ahead in the workplace, depict themselves as victims who need more support and more respect than they're currently getting. That's really bad, and that is going to cause divisions in the workplace.
And like all these cases, these undermine the genuine cases where people, genuinely, there are women who they tell the boss they're pregnant and they get fired, or they get totally just absolutely blindsided, there are racist employers, and there will be transphobic, and there will be homophobic employers, and there are people who feel they can't be open about just who they are, not I hate that word, flawed, but just literally just being who they are. Can't bring their partner to the office party when everyone else does because their partner is of the same gender as them, and things like that. And we need to make sure that we identify the cases that are genuine. And when there are a lot of other cases, it messes up. Let me also ask you, because I would be remiss if I let you go without asking you about these latest developments on lockdown issues, and Keir Starmer calling for a 2 or 3 week circuit breaker, national lockdown. There's not been, frankly, enough pushback from the government on this one. I worry we are now just in a sort of a nuclear arms race of everyone demanding more and more measures, lockdown restrictions, which, again, there's no evidence they work. World Health Organization says they don't, and there are numerous examples around the world, like Sweden, to prove that they're not necessary. What are your thoughts on what Keir Starmer had to say?
I think if the government follows that or feels under pressure to go with this so-called circuit breaker that Keir Starmer and others want, I think it will be a disaster. And I'm already sick and tired of the phrase circuit breaker. It's such a dishonest Orwellian phrase. It means national lockdown. That is what they're calling for. And lockdowns are disastrous. They make people lose their jobs. They have a massive impact on mental health. They split families apart. They cause despair. That is what Keir Starmer is calling for. He's calling for us to go back into a situation where hundreds of thousands will lose their jobs, businesses will collapse, and families will feel bereft. And he needs to be honest about that.